Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Mestre Vibes. Mestre Sukuri coming to you from Tokyo, Japan. Today, I'm going to jump right into it because I think today's topic is pretty interesting. As you all know, last week, my nephew's here. He's Japanese, and now he's going to University of Colorado doing a PhD program, which he'll finish up in 2025, full scholarship, super smart kid in astrophysics. He grew up here with me next to him, and I feel that I influenced him a lot, especially after we have several conversations about the following topic. So I'm going to jump right into it today. And we talked, and I decided that I wanted to talk about this specific topic, and I know some people might not agree, but let me tell you where I'm coming from. I'm going to be talking about the more of an academic approach and an experience approach and a little bit of my messy experience on it. The difference, how I see racism in Japan and racism as an American concept, okay? Now, remember, I've got I have all but my master's thesis done in San Diego, and I did my master's thesis here in international relations. And my thesis was importation and globalization of Afro-Brazilian culture in Japan. As I've mentioned before, Japan has one of the biggest Brazilian theme festivals, carnivals, and I don't know now because after Corona things have changed a lot, but we'll see how it revamps and how they reinvent themselves to be able to do something new. So, how do I see the difference of racism in Japan as compared to the United States? I'm only going to talk about those two and maybe a couple of small stories or anecdotes just to have people have a better understanding. But before I came to Japan, I had studied a lot about ethnic, right? My undergraduate was political science and a double major in Hispanic Latin American studies. I did also a year of all my classes at San Diego State in Latin American studies, and it was always focused on the cultural and anthropological aspect of what I do. And since moving to Japan, I've always kept up to date with research on Afro-Brazilian culture, globalization, anything ethnic arts and cultural arts as a form of cultural currency. I've mentioned that in different podcasts. So today, before we talk about racism, I want to define how I'm going to use racism, because a lot of times people use the word, and it's always funny to me because having been studying this for many, many years, for decades, and studying cultural anthropology and studying international relations and history and all these things, a lot of times people will lump everything into one word and not really understand the word and how it works, but more of how people use it on popular media, right? Like, for example, I always talk about, I have friends who do IT. I mean, people say, oh, IT, and they go, I get it, but actually it's such a specific and challenging and incredibly technical field that there's so many things. When you say IT, it can mean almost anything that has to do with turning on the light switch all the way to supercomputer. So there's so much going on, but people just kind of give it a blanket term and think they understand. And I feel that when we talk about culture, that's the one thing I've run into a lot in my life. Maybe people say, well, it's not that complicated, but actually there's so many things that go into the study of culture and anthropology and cultural anthropology and all these things. So racism and discrimination. So first, racism is something when you judge another person or another culture by their ethnic background. For example, if you see a black person and say, well, they're going to be most likely this way. Or if you see a white person, say they're most likely going to be this way. Whether it is good or bad, and I've mentioned this, like positive racism and negative racism. Negative racism leads to discrimination. Or, for example, that person is white or black, and it's because of this, I don't want to deal with this, or I don't give them an opportunity. So that's discrimination. But something we see a lot in Japan is positive racism too. So for all the negative racism that you might hear about Japan, there's a lot of what I would consider positive racism. For example, if you do something and you're a foreigner, you can get away with it more likely. Or if you're doing something here like ethnicity, even if you didn't do it back home, you can come here and say, oh, I did. You have more cultural currency, more cultural authority because of that. I've seen people who obviously had nothing to do with like capoeira. A lot of Brazilians will talk about capoeira and they've never done it, but they give so much only because they're here and they know that they can give their opinion, and Japanese will assume that they are an authority on it. So that's in my case with capoeira, but I've seen it with hip hop and yoga and everything. So next, racism can be positive or negative. So let's keep that in mind as I talk about this topic today. Racism versus discrimination. So discrimination is when you keep something from someone or hinder somebody's ability because of who they are. For example, oh, they might be from Africa, so let's not give them a job or whatever, So there's so many things that you can do to discriminate. One other word I'd like to share with you all today is something called microaggressions. And when we talk about racism, we need to understand there are examples of what we would call racism in Japan. And a lot of times they're generally in the form of what we call microaggressions. And microaggressions are basically when people do things that are kind of subconscious or under the veil of politeness, right? Little things that you might feel are microaggressions, like such as for me. When one night I was walking and in Shibuya, and I was wearing my Rasta hat. It was winter, it was really cold, my beanie, and the police surrounded me. It was about 8 years ago, I would say. And they surrounded me and they said, hey, can we search you? And I said, well, why did you stop me? And they said, well, people who wear these colors, like my hat, the Rasta colors, tend to be involved in drug use. Yes, I have the video still. I'll actually maybe even release it here on Patreon. And they said, well, I said, that's ridiculous. I said, do you stop everybody who has these colors or wears something? Because Japanese always wore back in the day like Rasta colors, or even like 10-year-old kids would be walking around with a Rasta shirt with a big marijuana leaf on it. And I don't know if the parents knew what it was or what reason, but they thought it was fashionable. So I said, if you see a little kid with that, would you stop him? And of course the cops, without thinking, said, yes, of course we do. And we all know that that's not true. I have never seen, in 23 years, I have rarely seen them ever stop a Japanese person. Not never actually, unless they were driving drunk. But if someone's just walking down the street, they will never stop a Japanese person, even if they look homeless, even if they look like they're wearing, even if they're drunk. If you're walking home drunk in Japan, the police will not stop you. But they will stop you if you're a foreigner wearing Rasta colors. So this is what we call a microaggression. And although it's not blatant racism in your face, like when I grew up in the United States, especially towards the Mexican American community, and you even see that now with this whole defend the border MAGA stuff. So I'm not going to get into that because I just don't even feel it's political. It's just ignorance. So these microaggressions is something that most people deal with here. And I've noticed there's a lot of people here who don't even see them. And if you want to talk about who complains about racism more than anybody since I've been in Japan, it's generally people who've come from privileged backgrounds. People who come from countries where Anglo-Saxon or white people tend to be the dominant. They're the ones who complain about racism more, and they say it's unfair. And I think the reason is because a lot of them have never suffered negative racism. They've always had the positive racism, where they get benefit from being blue-eyed, blonde hair. It's amazing how many people you'll see here who are blue-eyed, blonde hair, who are unattractive, but will get so much like told you're beautiful, this and that. And it's because Japanese focus on that one little thing, like, oh, your eyes, and that's what makes you beautiful. So this is another form of microaggression, but in a positive way, right? Because they actually are seeing you as a toy or as an accessory or something. And when we move to the next step of talking about the difference between racism in Japan and in the United States, in comparative speaking, this is something that I was talking to my nephew about, and we always have to be very careful. Why? Because culture affects how we perceive things. If we want to go with what the definition of racism is in a first world context at the, let's say, the highest level of cultural development or educational development, then Japan is a very racist country. But all cultures take time to develop and to change, and to also understand that they see racism differently. In my opinion, Japan doesn't see racism, it's for them, it's a very logical thing. They do not come from the American slavery or conquest of northern Mexico or a lot of immigrant culture. So they don't really have the same concept of racism as, say, the United States. For them, Japan has always been a very classist system. People joke, but after 23 years, just like in India where you have different classes, Japanese tend to be that way. If you ever get a chance, it's an older book, but please read Dogs and Demons. I can't remember the author's names, but it was called Dogs and Demons, and it's a book about Japan and how things work. And the author said something that stuck with me. Japanese people are born knowing exactly what their role in life will be, and then they die. It's like a stage play. Like if you were born into a very poor family, then you will always be poor, and you'll be that low class, low poor person, and you just accept it. And that's kind of interesting because that also leads to the reason why Japan has a very low entrepreneurial percentage, right? I remember at Waseda we were talking about entrepreneurship, and my teacher, who was the first Japanese teacher to get from the London School of Economics a PhD in entrepreneurial theory, said in the United States at the time, we're talking like, I want to say 2005, 2006, 12%, 11% of entrepreneurial projects or ventures were done by startups, like people with no background in what they were doing, just kind of getting their thing done. Entrepreneurial, new startups were 12% entrepreneurial. 12% of new startups were entrepreneurial. This means like most, or of course, like other companies starting, like Google starts a new company, or Microsoft starts a new company or something like that, right? But in Japan, it was less than 0.5%. And this is, I think, a lot to do. So when we're talking about the racism in Japan, after 23 years, I'm really, really, although they do base things on race, I don't see them basing it on racism from our background and from our cultural experience, but from a class system. It's very logical. You're a foreigner. By saying that, people get angry. Oh, that's racist. Gaikokujin, it's a nice way of Gaikokujin. It's like foreigner. It's, oh, you can't do that, but you are. You are. I'm a master of Capoeira. You are. You're from the United States. You are. For them, it's such a logical thing because everything has to be broken down into what roles or where you are in life, right? If you're so people say, oh, Japanese are very racist towards foreigners, but it depends on which class of foreigner. If you're an educated African who comes here with, let's say, a job at like a big bank, then you're treated completely different, and especially on how you present yourself, as opposed to right now, if you're somebody from Africa, for example, who comes here and marries a Japanese woman, and then you're working in the construction field. It's a very different thing, but we do that in the United States. But we say we shouldn't do that based on national origin or racism, but we do. And here it's just logical and simply put. I'm not saying that it's correct. I'm not saying it's good. What I'm saying is that's how I see Japanese perceiving what we call racism. For them, it's more classism, because I always say this, Japanese tend to be more hardline with other Japanese. I've had a lot of friends over the years say that when they see another Japanese in another country, unless they're formally introduced, they don't really talk. And the reason is because once you Japanese talk to each other culturally, they have to define what their role is, what their position is, what their level in the class system is. So you get a lot of that. So sometimes I wonder if it's not more classism based on Japanese cultural thinking versus what we call like by skin. Yes, skin color plays a factor, but my main point is that the skin factor is a marker, not an indicator, if that makes sense. So for example, like if a Japanese person is doing business with an African or somebody from Mexico or from the United States, it won't matter the skin color, it's how they're introduced. Oh, you're the vice president of the Mexican Avocado Association, and you're here in Japan. They're going to treat you, very different than somebody else. They might still have microaggressions and all these, generally ignorant ways of thinking, but then the United States has that a lot too. So I'm not going to be like saying it's better or not. Finally, very important concept when Japanese think about racism here, and I say this is because they still do like the blackface, they still do all the crazy stuff, they still every other week I deal with somebody who says something that would be considered incredibly racist, but they just like don't know or they don't think about it. And the main reason is I'm going to focus on the American cultural development. America, wherever you come from, you are being raised in a Judeo-Christian society. Things like love, things like all these different things, like be good to your fellow man, be a good person. These are all concepts that don't exist here. Whether they exist in different levels is because it's grown from a Japanese cultural background, not an American cultural background. And one thing that's helped me to survive here in Japan, especially, and to be successful, is to understand these things. There are good people in America, there are good people in Japan, there are bad people in America, and there are bad people in Japan. But I feel a lot of times people just jump into easy ways to make themselves feel better. Oh, that's racist. Oh, that's discrimination. And a lot of times not understanding where it's coming from. Yes, it happens. Here in Japan, I would say, on TikTok and you see stuff and, weird stuff, but generally it's Japanese to Japanese when it comes to like really being rude, because Japanese tend to be very careful in dealing with foreigners. But these are also largely based in what I call these microaggressions. So I thought it was really, really interesting to talk about this today. Let me look here at my notes. One thing I wanted to talk about, for example, everyone who visits Magome, my area here, it's called Magome, Magome. And I call it Magome because I've been here so long. And I think it's a good microcosm of how race and how Japanese people see foreigners, because I've been here for 20 years and everyone says like, I can't even walk to the train station without 100 people saying hello. But I can't even walk to the train station with 100 people who I've seen every day for 20 years, who look at me and still give me that vibe like gaijin, foreigner. And those microaggressions, they cross the street, they look at me, and then they run past the academia. Man, some of the stuff I've seen here, like I'll be standing in front of the academia with a cup of coffee for 20 years. And the same person will like get to right in front of the academia, and then they see me, and then they run past and just run past the academia and then stop and then go. And people can say whatever it is, but it's obviously a microaggression. Or, I mean, I can't tell you how many times the news here publishes, oh, foreigners rape Japanese, foreigners rape like Japanese women. It's only foreign, the stuff that goes on here is like anywhere. They're feeding to a very easy to understand group. And I mean, I love it here. I can't. Japan has just been fantastic to me. I've got a wonderful Japanese wife, wonderful kids, great friends, friendship, and love, right? I think that's something we should save for the next. I want to talk about the concept of friendship and love in Japan and how I see it and how I feel Japanese people see it on our next episode. What do you guys think? Give me a comment if you think that's going to be interesting. Guys, thank you for joining me today. Again, this is just a perspective, and this is how I see it, and it helps me to be more mentally stable and more mentally better off here in Japan. Guys, I hope this helps, and if you're living abroad, I hope you guys like it. If you've been in Japan, or if you've lived in Japan, probably this is going to hit a lot of things, but everybody's value and everybody's opinion will be different. Mine, I'm just giving you guys what I think in a more academic and a more cultural way and from experience of living here. I see a lot of stuff on the internet where people have lived here for 5 years talking about they've been here forever. My uncle Francis and my Vava Isabel, they've been here for like 40, 50 years. So, we'll see. All right, guys. Master Sukuri coming to you from Japan. You guys have a fantastic day. Thanks for supporting, and let's get to it.